Hold your breath. Right now, reading this, stop, and don't let the next one in for a moment. Nothing dramatic is happening yet, but a chemical count in your blood has just begun to shift, and your body is already keeping score. Here's the plain answer to what happens to your atoms the moment you stop breathing. Almost nothing happens to the atoms themselves. Not a single carbon, oxygen, or nitrogen atom in your body vanishes, changes, or dies. They are exactly as old as the universe, and they will outlast you by a span so long the number has no meaning. So if the atoms are fine, if they're immortal by any human measure, why does stopping breathing kill the arrangement we call you within about 4 minutes? Because you were never the atoms. You were the pattern they were holding, and that pattern runs on a current that breathing keeps flowing. Cut the breath, and the atoms stay. The current stops. And the strangest part, the part that takes the rest of this to unfold, is that most of the atoms in you right now were already someone else's, and already will be someone else's. And the word you describes a flame far more than it describes a candle. Let me put a real number on that flame. Roughly 98% of the atoms in your body are replaced within a single year. The lining of your gut turns over in about 4 days. The surface of your skin, roughly 2 to 4 weeks. Your skeleton, the thing that feels most permanently, stubbornly you, swaps out its entire mineral content over about a decade. You have almost none of the physical material you had at age 10. And yet you remember being 10. Something continued while the matter left. Hold that contradiction, because it's the whole video. Now, the moment of the last breath. Picture the smallest working unit of you, a single cell, and inside it, structures called mitochondria. Think of a mitochondrion as a tiny hydroelectric dam. Not a metaphor for effect, the physics is almost literally that. The dam holds back a reservoir, releases it through turbines, and the falling water spins generators. In your cell, the water is protons, hydrogen atoms stripped of their electron, pumped to one side of a membrane until they're packed tight, desperate to flow back. When they rush back through a spinning molecular turbine called ATP synthase, that turbine physically rotates about 150 times a second, and each rotation stamps out the body's universal energy currency, a molecule called ATP. What builds the reservoir? Oxygen. Oxygen is the drain at the bottom of the whole system, the final place the used-up electrons go. Every electron that has done its work down the chain has to be handed to something at the end, and oxygen is the only acceptor greedy enough to take it and keep the line moving. Breathing exists for one reason: to deliver that final electron acceptor to the bottom of the dam. Stop breathing, and the drain clogs. The electrons back up. The reservoir can no longer be filled. And here's the first thing almost nobody understands about dying at the atomic level. The lights don't go out because energy ran out. They go out because energy stopped moving. Why does that distinction matter so much? Because a battery sitting on a shelf has energy and does nothing. Life isn't stored energy. Life is energy in transit. The moment you stop breathing, you still contain enormous chemical energy, roughly the caloric content of a large meal locked in your tissues, but the machine that keeps it flowing has lost its drain. So the question shifts from, when does the energy run out, to a harder one. What actually breaks first when the flow stops? The answer is a pump, and it's a pump you've never once felt running. Every cell in your body spends up to a third of all its energy on one relentless task: the sodium-potassium pump. Picture a boat with a slow leak, and a person bailing water at exactly the rate it comes in. As long as the bailing continues, the boat rides level and looks perfectly stable. You'd never guess it was leaking at all. That bailing is the sodium-potassium pump, pushing sodium out and potassium in, thousands of times per second, in every one of your roughly 37 trillion cells. It runs on the ATP the dam produces. It never stops. It has never stopped in your entire life. When breathing ends and ATP production winds down within minutes, the bailing slows and then stops. The leak doesn't care. Sodium floods in, water follows sodium by simple osmosis, and the cell begins to swell. This is the true first event of death at the cellular level. Not decay, not rot, but a quiet flooding, cell by cell, as trillions of tiny pumps go still. If you've ever pressed on the skin of someone who has been gone for hours and felt how it holds the dent, you've felt the aftermath of that flooding. The bailers all stopped at once, and the boats filled. But this raises a sharper question. If the cells are only flooding, Why can't you simply drain them and start the pumps again? Why is there a window, those famous 4 minutes, after which even perfect resuscitation brings back a body but not a mind? The answer lives in your most expensive tissue, and it changes how you should think about the whole event. Your brain is 2% of your body weight and burns about 20% of your oxygen. It has almost no stored fuel of its own, a reserve measured in seconds, not minutes. Neurons are the most energy-hungry cells you own, because they hold a voltage across their membranes the way a charged capacitor does. And firing a thought means letting that voltage snap and then instantly rebuilding it. Rebuilding costs ATP. When the dam stops and the last few seconds of stored fuel burn off, the neurons can no longer hold their charge. And now something happens that has a name most people have never heard: the anoxic depolarization wave. Here's the physical picture. Every neuron is a battery holding a specific voltage, roughly 70 millivolts, negative inside. Losing that voltage all at once is called depolarization. When the pumps fail across a region of brain tissue, the neurons there lose their charge, and a depolarized neuron dumps a flood of glutamate, a signaling chemical, onto its neighbors, which forces those neighbors to depolarize too. It spreads like a row of dominoes, but worse, like a grass fire crossing a dry field, each patch igniting the next. A slow, silent wave of electrical collapse moves across the surface of the brain at about 3 millimeters per minute. Researchers who record this in animal tissue call it the wave of death, and it is measurable, real, and, for a short time, reversible. That reversibility is the whole reason the 4-minute number exists, and I want to be straight with you about that number, because it gets thrown around like a law of physics and it isn't one. You'll hear 4 minutes to brain death stated flatly everywhere. The truth is messier and more interesting. In a warm body, irreversible damage begins somewhere around 4 to 6 minutes, yes. But in cold water, that window can stretch dramatically. There are documented cases of people submerged in near-freezing water for 30, 40, even beyond 60 minutes, and recovered with intact minds. Because cold slows the dam's demand for fuel to a crawl. The clock isn't fixed, it's set by temperature. So the honest version is 4 minutes at normal body heat, and the colder you are, the longer the atoms hold the pattern. Why would cold protect the pattern? Because every chemical reaction, including the leak in the boat, runs slower when it's cold. Drop the temperature 10 degrees and metabolic rate roughly halves. The balers can rest longer between strokes because the leak has slowed to a trickle. This is not folklore. It's why surgeons deliberately chill patients to around 18 degrees Celsius for certain heart operations, stopping the heart and the breathing entirely for up to 40 minutes while they work, then rewarming and restarting the whole system. They are, in the most literal sense, walking a person up to the edge of the atomic collapse and back again on purpose. That procedure has a name: deep hypothermic circulatory arrest, and thousands of people are alive today having crossed that line and returned. If that just reframed what 4 minutes means for you, and there's a stranger layer coming, about where your atoms physically go next, and why one of them may already have belonged to a dinosaur, subscribe now, because that part is a few minutes away, and it's the reason I sat down to make this. Now, let's follow the atoms themselves past the moment of collapse, because this is where the physics gets genuinely beautiful and most explanations quit early. When the flooding is complete, and the cell membranes finally rupture, the enzymes that were kept locked in tidy compartments spill out and begin taking apart the structures around them. This is self-digestion, and it has a precise name: autolysis. The cell's own tools, designed to recycle worn-out parts, now have no manager telling them where to stop. The proteins that made you begin to come apart into their building blocks, amino acids, which are nothing more than specific arrangements of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and a little sulfur. And here is the law that governs everything from this point forward, the one physical principle I promised would feel obvious once you see it. It's called the conservation of mass, and it's older than modern chemistry. The Frenchman Antoine Lavoisier established it in the 1780s, weighing substances before and after they burned, and finding the total never changed. Nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, everything is rearranged. When people say ashes to ashes, dust to dust, they've stumbled onto real physics without knowing it. Every atom that was arranged into you gets unarranged and handed back. The accounting is perfect. The universe loses nothing when you die, and it gained nothing when you were born. It only borrowed. Where do the borrowed atoms go? Follow the carbon. A large share of the carbon in your body will, over months, be converted by bacteria and simple chemistry into carbon dioxide and released into the air. That carbon dioxide gets pulled from the atmosphere by the nearest hungry leaf, because a plant's entire body is built from carbon it steals out of thin air. Not from the soil, as almost everyone assumes, but from the CO2 around it. The tree outside a cemetery is, in a plain and unsentimental sense, partly built from the people beneath it. That isn't poetry laid over the science. That is the science, stated flatly. So think about what your next breath actually is. You are inhaling roughly 10 to the 22 atoms right now, a 1 followed by 22 zeros. That number is so vast that the mathematics forces a conclusion people find hard to believe when they first meet it. With near certainty, every breath you take contains at least a few atoms that once passed through the lungs of any given person who lived long enough and breathed enough. A Roman soldier, a medieval farmer, a child born 1,000 years ago. The air mixes, the atoms scatter and redistribute across the whole atmosphere over a couple of years. There are more atoms in a single breath than there are breaths in the entire atmosphere. Do the arithmetic and the sharing becomes unavoidable. I'd bet most of you have heard some version of that fact and filed it under nice thought. I want you to sit with the literal mechanics of it instead. The nitrogen atom that will be part of a protein in your bicep next year is, this very second, floating in the air above a field somewhere, or dissolved in the ocean, or locked in someone else's exhale. You are not a closed object. You are a slow eddy in a river of atoms, a shape the water holds for 80 years before letting go. If you've ever stood by a river and watched a standing wave hold its form over a rock while the actual water rushed through it and away, you have already seen exactly what you are. The wave is real. The wave has a shape you could photograph. And there is no water in it that was there a second ago. If that river image made something click, if it's the clearest picture you've been given of what you actually are, hit like. Because that single signal is what pushes this in front of the next person still thinking of themselves as a solid thing. Now let's go one layer deeper than the carbon and the nitrogen, down to where these atoms were forged. Because this is where the body meets the cosmos, and the physics stops being about death at all. The oxygen you stopped breathing at the start of this, the calcium in the bones that will outlast your soft tissue by years, the iron in the blood that carried that oxygen, none of it was made on Earth. Hydrogen and a little helium came out of the Big Bang itself. Everything heavier, the carbon in every cell, the oxygen you breathe, the nitrogen in your DNA, was cooked inside stars, under pressures and temperatures our language barely reaches, and then flung across space when those stars died and exploded. Here's the mechanism, accurately, no fudging. A star spends its life fusing light atoms into heavier ones, and the heat of that fusion is what holds the star up against its own crushing gravity. Picture a stone arch holding itself up. The outward push of fusion is the keystone, and gravity is the endless weight pressing down. When a massive star finally fuses its core all the way to iron, the fusion stops paying out energy. Iron is the one element that costs more to fuse than it returns. The keystone is pulled. The arch collapses in less than a second, rebounds, and detonates as a supernova. And in that explosion the heaviest atoms are both created and scattered. The calcium in your teeth was manufactured in a dying star and has been traveling for billions of years to arrive, briefly, as you. So when did those atoms become alive? That's the question that has no clean answer, and I'm not going to pretend it does. This is one of the genuinely open borders in science. There is no line you can point to where non-living carbon becomes living carbon. The atom doesn't change. A carbon atom in a lump of coal and a carbon atom in a beating heart are physically identical, interchangeable, indistinguishable under any instrument. Life isn't a substance added to matter. Life is a particular way matter is arranged and kept in motion. Which means the moment you stop breathing and the pattern fails, nothing is subtracted from the universe. The arrangement simply relaxes, and the atoms that were briefly alive were never anything other than ordinary atoms doing an extraordinary dance. That word, arrangement, is the key that unlocks the thing that troubles people most about all this. If I am only an arrangement, and the arrangement disperses, is there anything of me that persists? Let me answer with the one thing physics can actually offer, and it's stranger than comfort. Information is not the same as matter, and it obeys different rules. The specific arrangement of your atoms, the pattern, leaves traces the moment it exists. The words you've spoken have moved air that moved other air. The people you've changed carry a version of your pattern in the wiring of their own brains, physically, as altered connections between their neurons. You have been copying yourself into the world your entire life without noticing. There's real uncertainty here, and I won't oversell it. Whether information is ever truly, permanently destroyed is one of the deepest unsettled arguments in physics. It's at the heart of a decades-long fight about what happens at the edge of a black hole, and serious people still disagree. So I can't tell you the pattern that is you is preserved forever in some cosmic ledger. Nobody honestly can. What I can tell you is narrower and solid. The atoms are conserved with perfect certainty, and the pattern is copied, imperfectly, into everything you touch. One of those is a law. The other is a fact about how influence physically works. Neither is faith. Let me bring this all the way back to the breath you're holding, or the one you just took. Take a real one now, deep. In that single inhalation you pulled in atoms that were forged in a dead star, that have been part of oceans and glaciers and other lungs, that will one day be part of a tree, a fish, a stranger not yet born. For the span of one lifetime, those atoms agreed to hold a shape that could wonder about itself. That's the rarest thing they'll ever do. A hydrogen atom can drift for 13 billion years and never once be part of something that knows it exists. You are the interval in which the atoms woke up. So what actually happens to your atoms the moment you stop breathing? They are released, unharmed, from the hardest job they'll ever have. The dam stops turning, the bailing stops, the wave crosses the brain, the arrangement lets go, and the carbon lifts into a leaf, the calcium settles into soil, the iron rusts back into the ground it came from, and the nitrogen returns to the air for the next set of lungs. Not one atom is lost, not one is diminished. The ledger balances to the last particle, exactly as Lavoisier said it must. I'll leave you with the thing I keep coming back to, and I genuinely like your answer. In the comments, tell me the oldest thing you've ever touched, a stone, a fossil, a piece of family furniture, and whether knowing its atoms will outlast you makes you feel smaller or larger. I go back and forth. Some days it makes me feel like nothing. Most days, lately, it makes me feel borrowed and grateful for the loan. And if someone you love has been afraid of the ending, quietly, the way people carry these things, share this with them, because it may be the gentlest true thing anyone can say about it. You will not end, you will disperse, and the atoms will go looking for the next thing worth becoming.